All right, we're live. Christ in capital, love God, love neighbor, build something. Let's go. Nathan, is that short and to the point enough?
That was nice. Wow.
Good. Okay. No formal long introductions. We have a time crunch. Got a lot to get in. So let's go ahead and get started. I wanted to, before we jump in, I wanted to give just a background to the guest that we have on today. This is going to be a condensed version of the foreword to the book that we're going to be talking about. And it was written by his daughter. Okay. So I just want to set this up real quick. Our guest today just starting out, built his house from the ground up, launched a successful magazine out of a church newsletter, started an innovative school for his children that has inspired the game-changing movement that is classical Christian education, and more specifically, the Association of Classical Christian Schools, which now has like 50,000 students. He founded and grew a successful classical Christian university, started a thriving, healthy church, and has since founded the Communion of Reformed Evangelical Churches. He has read a book a week for the past 40 years, has written over 100 books. He's a voracious blogger, and even in recent years started podcasting or plodcasting. He never passes up time with his kids when the occasion arises, and the three of them have grown up to be very successful in their own families and creative endeavors. And then Rebecca, his daughter, finishes the foreword with this, quote, "The man is endlessly patient, endlessly diligent, shockingly ambitious, and never in a flurry. So when he says we're going to talk about productivity, I would highly recommend that we all listen up." So now that I've rolled out the red carpet, Doug, welcome to the show, and thank you for your time.
Well, thanks for having me.
So let's just jump right in. Why this book? So for the readers, what's the spark for this book? Why did you feel like you needed to write it?
The spark for it was probably people asking me, how do you get everything done? And the short answer to that is that I don't. You should see what's all over the floor. But if I wrote a book on how much is all over the floor, nobody would buy it. So people already have their own stuff all over the floor. The things that Becca pointed to are things that people notice. And of course, it was the Lord's blessing. And of course, there's a host of other people that I've recruited and delegated to that made all these things go. But even if you've got a number of other people, you have to delegate wisely. You have to know what you're doing, because P.G. Woodhouse once said, somebody is always up to something, and the rest of them are up to something else. So what you want to do is keep track of what you've delegated, keep track of what you hand off, and that sort of thing. So people ask me, how do you manage your time? What's your average day look like? What's a sermon day look like? And I've gotten questions like that over the years. And I thought a book on productivity would be a good place to put all the tips I've learned in one place. And I've enjoyed productivity books, how to manage your time books, although some of them, generally the people who write productivity books, and this would not include me, are highly organized, and they've got a bin for everything, and they've got one of those little label handgun things, and they've got labels on everything. And I'm not like that. I'm what I call semi-organized, and I wrote a book for the semi-organized.
I gotcha. Yeah, it seems like a lot of those productivity books. The way that this one differs is that there's like a holistic framework for why we're doing productivity, whereas it seems like in another sense, productivity for the sake of productivity. That's kind of the gist of it. So let's kind of dive into the first section. I in my mind, I have it broken out into three kind of key areas. One is like the work and wealth section, and you've got tools, and you've got the ploductivity. So in a couple different places throughout the book, you keep referencing Deuteronomy 8. And I'll read it real quick for those who don't, or just to kind of get us all up to speed. It says, take care lest you forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments and his rules and his statutes, which I command you today, lest when you have eaten and are full and have built good houses and live in them, and when your herds and flocks multiply and your silver and gold is multiplied and all that you have is multiplied, then your heart be lifted up and you forget the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Sounds like a nation that I know of. And then skip down to 17. Beware lest you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. You shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, that he may confirm his covenant that he swore to your fathers, as it is this day. What are we trying to get at with that verse? What's the punch that's used?
So there's two quotes. One is from elsewhere in Deuteronomy. Jeshurun waxed fat and kicked. Right. So one of my favorite Bible verses. We ought to make all the kids memorize that one. And then Cotton Mather said, faithfulness begat prosperity, and the daughter devoured the mother. So that's the pattern of Deuteronomy. If you obey God, if you live the way he says to live, one of the first things that happens is the cocaine bill goes way down, right? All of a sudden, when you have people who are converted and start worshiping God, and they get a job and they are faithful to their spouse, one of the first things that happens is a middle class starts to develop. That wealth starts to accumulate. It's not always in every, but it's a pattern that happens. People become more thrifty, more industrious, more careful, more prudent, and wealth starts to accumulate. And then the temptation comes that Deuteronomy 8 talks about, where you begin to trust in your wealth as though your own hand had obtained it for you. So that's the temptation. You trust God, he blesses, you start to trust the blessing instead of God, and then the blessing unravels, and you cry out to the Lord and to save you from this mess you're in, and he delivers you, and then you turn the page to read the next chapter of Judges.
Right. That whole part, using that passage in Deuteronomy reminded me of something that Nathan said a while ago. And Nathan, feel free to comment on this, but when we were talking about economics in the macro, we ultimately have to get to the theological and the philosophical, because the economics at root, at the base level, are social, right? They're social. The macro of the economic landscape is based on the individual interpersonal relationships, transactions between individuals. So I don't know if you want to comment on that, Nathan, or anything.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary. And because it's social, there are ethical implications for how that faithfulness gets worked out in relationship and in society, and then also before the face of God. Which I think it's really interesting what you're saying, Doug, about faithfulness begets prosperity, and then the daughter devours the mother. It leads me to the question of what are some of the interpersonal dangers with kind of a life oriented toward productivity or work.
Right. I'd say I'll speak here as a pastor, and I've got a community of saints here in Moscow where there's a high level of aggressive entrepreneurial thinking on the one hand, and we also have saints who have struggled their whole lives with holding down jobs and just what would look like sheer bad luck and that sort of thing. And I've got a bunch of people in the same congregation, some of whom have made millions or hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it looks like it just came out of the blue, and others have just struggled for some time. The thing I want to do as a pastor is guard against pride on the one hand, pride and self-sufficiency for the people who are blessed, and envy and acrimony on the part of the people who are less fortunate. Because I think that envy is a deadly killer. Envy is one of the things that keeps people in a downtrodden position. And
Yeah.
pride is one of the things that causes people to act like Nebuchadnezzar. Is this not great Babylon that I have built? And God humbles them. So if you're proud, take heed lest you fall. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before the fall. So Paul tells Timothy in 1 Timothy 6, instruct those who are rich in this present world not to set their hope on riches. That's how you teach but you don't teach the rich people to feel guilty about their wealth. You teach them to live in such a way as that they don't need to feel guilty about their wealth because they've stayed out of self-sufficiency.
Yes, that's awesome. That's awesome. And I think that kind of leads into my next question, which I don't think you really touched on it in the book very much. So we live in a time when wealth redistribution is a big topic. It's a hot topic. And it seems like the church has been pretty good in modern history about fighting it off, just kind of pushing it, keeping it at bay. But it seems like, in current times, it's seeping in a little bit, and it's more attractive. And the media is very much on this track of making it palatable. So
right,
what's kind of your how do you suggest that people address that, push back against it? How do you do it?
Okay, so I think this push for redistribution is in certain quarters of the church is not just seeping in. I would say it's flooding in. The whole woke thing is simply envy decked out in various guises. So there's sexual envy in feminism. There is racial envy in the Black identity movement, where they're comparing themselves to white supremacist culture all the time and hating it, but wanting to have it. Or that's how you can tell that envy is going on. And in class economics, it's the less fortunate over against the wealthy or the 1%, or that sort of thing. So I just call it all. I just say everybody over there is a commie. So so I think we need to fight the commies, and I just think it because it's flooding in. I think we need to attack it with loud shouts of alarm. The church needs to preach and teach against pride and self-sufficiency on the one hand, which is preaching against those who worship the altar of mammon, and then preaching against envy and snark on the other hand, which is preaching against the other devotees of the idol of mammon. Everybody's worshiping mammon because I've got it and I'm blessed by mammon, and you've got it and I need to, but I'm the poor man who hates the rich man is just as owned by wealth as the man who has the wealth. So what you want is Christians to find their identity in Christ and to love one another. And back to 1 Timothy 6, not to set their hope on riches, but to be rich in good deeds. So you want people who are well-to-do to overflow with good works, with the money that God has given them, but you want them to give out of gratitude, not out of guilt. Because if you're flipping through a Christian magazine and you see a picture of a starving kid, and they say, you could save this kid's life for 20 cents a day, or you could turn the page, you jerk.
Right.
Right? Then when you turn the page, I feel guilty. So when a person does that, how much will they give? Well, just enough to make the guilt go away, which usually is around $20. Okay, so what you do is you buy off the extortion, and you give $20. But if you teach people to give out of gratitude, in other words, I've been enormously blessed by God, and this is a good thing, and I want to share a good thing. Mm-hmm. The desire to share a good thing is far more motivating over the long haul than the desire to get the guilt to go away. And besides, if wealth is a cancer, the way a lot of these woke people are talking, this wealth is a cancer. Well, if I've got cancer, why do I want to give it to everybody else?
Yeah.
I'm just going to do this self-sacrificial thing and keep it all here. Yeah. I'm going to jump on that hand grenade.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Could I
Greater love has no man than this, right?
could I jump in on the gift and gratitude paradigm? Because I really love that. And I think adding to what you're saying, Doug, it also, that gift gratitude paradigm works for the people receiving or the people who are tempted to envy. So if I get a check in the mail from the government, or if I get some sort of kind of government intervention that makes me feel more equal, I don't write a thank you note to the government. Like, I don't receive that with gratitude. I receive that as, this is something that I demanded, that I deserve. That continues to feed the envy. That continues to support the same kind of soul crushing orientation that's going to leave people hollow. But if I receive a gift, I can't envy that person anymore. And that creates, not only does it provide for people's well-being, but also gives them a leg up to help combat the problems in their soul.
Yeah, it helps build brotherhood.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Let's move on to tools. I'm going to skip over a couple of the questions, but just to give a sense for kind of the tools chapters, there's some quotes I like. Tools are a form of technology, and technology is a form of wealth. You also say tools make it possible for our radius of fruitfulness to extend much farther than it otherwise would. So one thing I want to kind of shift to is the idea that Christians in recent past, and modern history, have been kind of caricatured as technophobes. And part of me is like, I understand that in some portions of recent history, but in the grand scheme of things, that shouldn't really be the case. Another part of me is like, okay, maybe that's warranted, because Christians have sort of a standard through which to view how we should adopt technology, and if we should adopt technology, how we should use it, those sorts of things. And we don't just take it, wholesale, just right off the bat.
Right.
How would you how would you counsel someone who is asking about how we should view technology, the gray areas? I mean, you just wrote a book about a sex bot. And there's other forms of like sketchy technology that, is coming down the pike. What are your thoughts? How should we kind of approach those things?
I think that Christians ought to approach the latest hot thing with glad suspicion. All right, so I think that the perennial temptation that the pious have had is to regard the locus of sin as in the thing itself, whether it's in the alcohol, or in the food, or in the money, or in the gold, or for liberals, in the gun, right? So guns cause violence, and gold causes greed, and food causes gluttony, and women cause rape, and you have all these this temptation to project the source of the sin problem outside my own heart. So, but sin arises in every human heart. Like Solzhenitsyn says, the line between good and evil runs down the middle of every human heart. That's where the fundamental division is. That's where we obey God or we don't obey God. And so consequently, the Bible does not teach that wealth is inherently sinful, but men are. And so consequently, when a blessing comes, that's where the Deuteronomy 8 problem arises. The blessing comes, and instead of saying thank you, instead of receiving it as a gift from God and remembering him throughout my use of it, which is what Deuteronomy 28 teaches, that why were the Jews taken into exile? Because they did not rejoice with exceeding gladness for all the stuff that God gave them. Right? They didn't rejoice. They didn't rejoice coram Deo with their stuff in the presence of God. They started to feel entitled. They took it as an entitlement. This is my birthright. This is the way I can just assume this is mine. So I think the suspicion is good, but I think that if it's just suspicion, you're going to wind up as like the Amish. You know,
Yeah.
you're just going to draw an arbitrary line and say progress stops here, which
Right.
the Amish did. Wendell Berry has done. You know, Wendell Berry types his manuscripts on a typewriter, but doesn't do a computer. Well, I don't know how that you ship off the typewritten manuscript and they scan it at the publishers.
Right.
What have you accomplished? So it's just suspicion is going to result in an arbitrary line. But if you just have all the discernment of a 5-gallon wet vacuum cleaner, and you just anything that comes, you just take it in. You're an early adopter. You're one of the people standing in line at the Apple store for the next upgrade for 3 days beforehand. Then I think you're probably too eager. You're not asking enough questions. You need to realize that the problem is not in the technology. The problem is in our use of it and in your use of it. And if you snatch it up right away, you probably haven't asked enough questions.
Okay. That's really helpful. So just for the sake of time, I'm gonna jump down. I wanted to read this quote. This, I think, was absolutely fantastic. And it sums up the previous discussion about wealth and tools and all that. You said the two issues mentioned earlier that underlie economics are, first, the need for us to respect the free choices of others, and second, to use our own power of free choice to investigate the fruitful world God gave to us. We leave the results, or the future, to God. A national economy on any given day is the sum total of all the economic decisions that are made by all the individuals in that country throughout the course of the day, and this all relates to our productivity and the work we are assigned to do. If we resist the temptation to meddle, if we let the free market just run, we will find products improve over time. They had better. And this is not a form of adultery called, quote, trusting the free market, or some abstraction called, quote, capitalism. To speak about markets, or Adam Smith's invisible hand, is to use a form of shorthand. When we speak about the laws of supply and demand, we are talking about the author of that law and of others. In other words, the free market does not decide the price of new products. The decision is made by the Lord Jesus. And I love that. Holistic framework for viewing economics, wealth, creation, all of that. I had a podcast episode at the very beginning when I started this little project where I think I called it presuppositional economics. A whole bunch of rambling. But I could have just read this quote right here and I would have gotten the gist out of it. So I thought that was fantastic. What is plodding? Just kind of dive into that. What is it?
Okay. What plodding is I would regard it as my phrase for redeeming the time. So we are given. George Gilder is very good on this, where he says there's something that we all have that nobody ever gets wealthier than anybody else with, and that is 24 hours in a day. Mm-hmm. It's as though I wake up in the morning and God hands me a chit that says you've got 24 hours to spend, and the richest man in the world gets the same thing, right?
Right.
We all have this thing. The government can't print money. The government can print money, but they can't print time. And so what I am doing is I've got this resource that until the Lord takes me home on any given day, I know what's coming my way. 24 hours are coming my way. And what I want to do is I want to be, as one of my kids teased me, or one of my kids recently said, that I want to function like the Sioux Indians did. I want to use every part of the buffalo. Right.
Right.
So that's what ploductivity is. I want to use every part of the buffalo, and I don't want it, but I don't want to do it in my hair's on fire, like running around. Time's a wasting. We're burning daylight. It needs to be much more measured and deliberate and methodical than that, and that's why I like the name Ploductivity, because you can cover a lot of territory if you just keep walking. Don't panic. Don't set your hair on fire. Just use every minute, and use every minute at a slow and steady pace. So I believe in routines. I believe in just doing the same thing, getting up and doing a little bit. And if, let's say I finish with this interview here. I'm in my office now. Let's say I'll finish the interview. I'll look at my calendar. Okay, let's say I had an appointment in 15 minutes. Okay, what do I do with that 15 minutes? That's a little tiny part of the buffalo.
Yeah.
So I've got a checklist, various checklists of things different projects that I have, and I can say, all right, I can do one increment of this project in 15 minutes because I like to do, I like to chip away at this project for at least one increment a day. And I know how long it takes. It takes 10 to 15 minutes. So I use that 10 to 15 minutes to do that thing. And so consequently, I don't think, I'll put it this way, I don't think that a lot of people throw away a lot of time. And it's that they just, either they veg out or they squander it or they, and I'm not against relaxation or rest or, taking it easy. I don't think this ought to be a maniacal kind of lifestyle. It ought to just be steady, steady, slow, methodical.
Yeah. And it forces you to think long-term. If I'm going to take little steps, you've got to think, in the years kind of timelines.
Right. Right.
Nathan, do you want to talk about courage real quick?
Yeah. So I love the emphasis on being intentional about those small choices. All big choices are really just made up of small choices. All big things are made up of small actions. And so that made me think about the idea of courage. I've been kind of ruminating on that idea and cowardice as kind of innovating the culture right now, innovating young people quite a bit. So in terms of choices and taking ownership of time and ambition, where does the virtue of courage fit in? If I'm thinking about, okay, these are the practical steps I can take to redeem the time. Okay, but then when I'm thinking about my own heart orientation, that's going to help me do that over the long haul. Where do you think courage fits into that?
Okay, so C.S. Lewis says somewhere that courage is not so much a separate virtue as it is the testing point of all the virtues. Okay, so if I'm only industrious, as long as it doesn't threaten me, then I'm not courageous. If I'm only honest, up to the point I'm personally threatened, then I'm not really honest. I'm just going the path of least resistance. If I want to be fruitful, if I want to work hard and be industrious, and I want to labor in the kingdom of God, and I'm doing that let's say I've figured out a way to do it effectively, and I'm starting to be effective. It's going to be about 10 minutes before I run into opposition. Okay, because it turns out that we live in a fallen world. It turns out the devil doesn't want effective Christians. He doesn't want fruitful Christians. He doesn't want people who are that productive. And so you run into opposition. And when you run into opposition, the devil knows how to make it smart. He knows how to bring the pressure to bear. And so I have to say, okay, if I do this, if I undertake this task, if I start shooting at the devil, I can't be surprised when he starts shooting back. Right? So a lot of Christians have sort of figured out a way to live in sort of an uneasy truce with the powers of darkness. Look, I'll leave you alone. Here's the deal. You leave me alone. I just want to carve out a quiet middle-class existence. But money, resources, technology, all of these things are, like my son, Nate, said to me one time, Dad, money is bullets. Money is simply ammo. It's what we're using to advance the kingdom. Well, if you're seriously intent on doing the work of the kingdom, then you're going to need courage pretty much everywhere you go. Everything you say, because somebody's going to come after you to get you to abandon this thing that is threatening what the bad guys are up to.
Yep. That's awesome.
I think that's great. I just want to say that I've admired what you've done for quite a while, because I see how much courage it takes. There's so much opposition to the work that you're doing. And then there's also just kind of boy, you could have had a lot easier life if you didn't try to start as many things as you did, right? There's also just kind of the flesh, I'd rather just rest than do all this stuff. And so I've seen that reflected in your work for years.
Well, yeah, thank you. But one of the things that I just think Christians ought to be mindful of is Jesus says two things about this. He says, when you beware, he says, when all men speak well of you, because that's how they used to talk about the false prophets. So if I'm driving down the road and I see, hey, I've got a great reputation with everybody, Jesus tells me that should be a blinking light on my dashboard. Check the oil, do something here, because if everybody thinks you're wonderful, the chances are pretty good that you're not. And if, on the other hand, Jesus says, when men attack you and slander you and despitefully use you and throw all manner of dead cat against you, they're doing all this, Jesus says, in that day, rejoice and be exceedingly glad. So Jesus tells us that we should expect opposition. We should rejoice when we get it, and taking care that, as Peter says, when you're attacked, don't let the slander be true. So,
yeah,
if you're being attacked for being a skunk, you want to make sure you're not being a skunk, an actual skunk in God's eyes. But otherwise, we're to rejoice that the flak, the anti-aircraft fire, means that we're over the target.
That's awesome. All right. So we're up on time. Everybody go get this book. Economics, not just in the macro and the micro, also in the cosmic and the interpersonal. Get it. Be productive. Resist the devil. Yeah. Anything else, gentlemen?
Thank you very much for the good visit. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. We really appreciate it. And we'll talk to you guys later.
All right. Bye.